Hello and welcome to another episode of the AstraZeneca Women in Tech series. I'm your host, Ben Bentham, and today I'm joined by Faye Horwitz from our Enabling IT team based in Gaithersburg, USA. Faye, a big welcome to you. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Ben. Happy to be here.
Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. And maybe to jump straight into it, could you explain a bit about what you do and the team that you work within as well?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm part of the Enabling Units IT function. We essentially provide support for the back office areas, what people would call back office, typically finance, HR. For me specifically, I'm a head of IT and I support legal, global sustainability, and corporate affairs in addition to a couple other business areas. What I do essentially is help our business customers, our business stakeholders solve problems using technology. That's sort of the simplest way when I try to explain what I do. In their roles, they are trying to help us deliver life-saving medicines to patients in some form, depending upon what their role is. For our patent team, they're responsible for ensuring that we've got our IP secured and all of the items associated with that. So part of my responsibility is how can I help them better do their job, and is there a way that technology can help do that? So it's really, I would say, a business-facing role in where we work with them to, again, solve business problems.
Excellent. It sounds like a fascinating role, and I'm sure it has its own challenges as well. But am I right to say that IT wasn't your first career thought or choice?
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, IT was definitely not my first career. My first, as a kid, I actually wanted to be a stunt woman. So, there's, young Faye jumping over couches in her basement. But I ended up not doing that. I did go to university for theater. That was my undergraduate degree. And actually, it was when I was working some part-time jobs while I was trying to make a living, essentially in the theater, in which I sort of stumbled across technology, doing some desktop publishing, doing some computer animation, sort of a little bit, I would say, basic coding. And that's kind of how I sort of originally stumbled into IT. From there, and from there I ended up essentially realizing that if I wanted to do technology, I would have to go to university for it. So, sort of find, theater was great, but it wasn't going to prepare me for a world in IT. And so I went back to school. I went to a program at New York University, which is in New York City, called the Interactive Telecommunications Program. And which was great. It really taught me a lot. And from there, it sort of spurned my foundation of knowledge that I needed in order to have a career in IT.
Wow. And to me, theatre, IT, they're quite kind of polar opposites in how I see the world. So it's fascinating how you've gone from that to the other.
Yeah.
Are there any transferable skills?
I would say, presentation, certainly it helps in those situations. I think having to understand the human condition, I think, is another important aspect of it. Certainly in terms of working in AstraZeneca, I think that's really helpful to have that understanding of empathy, of what we're doing, what it's really about, which I think is really important. So I would say, being able to communicate effectively with people is a key role, I think, especially in terms of what I do. I think for anybody in IT, it's important, but I think specifically in my role, it's really, really key.
Great. So when you entered the world of IT then, were there many other women doing the same thing? And I guess over that time, have you seen the portion of male to female ratio change across the tech landscape?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there definitely were some women. There weren't a lot of women. I think what I've identified over time is what I've seen is actually the types of roles that women are doing has changed. So, for example, there were no CIOs. We wouldn't have for us, Cindy Hoots, we wouldn't have that. When I was coming up, I would say in IT, you really didn't see, occasionally you'd see a woman in I would say, a technology leadership position, not too frequently. You also didn't see developers. So you didn't see, I would say, women doing, I would say, coding, if you want to say in that way. But now, of course, that's a much more prevalent kind of career for women, which is very exciting. And I think that's a big shift that I've seen in sort of women in senior leaders, and the types of work that women are doing in technology has shifted a lot.
Yeah, I completely agree. So what advice would you give to other women that maybe are interested in pursuing a career in IT, whether that be at the start of their journey from university or kind of later on down their years, maybe have gained experience in another sector?
I would say one of the things that's important about recognizing a career, or to be successful, I would say, in IT, is that it's not about the technology. And what I mean by that is it's important to have technical skills, but don't forget your soft skills. I think that's really important, sort of understanding, why are we doing this? What's the business reason behind behind the project that I'm working on? And it's more than just business requirements. It's really sort of fundamentally understanding, what's the purpose of this? Why are we doing it? I think a lot of times people really, really focus hard on the tech skills. And that to me is foundational. You sort of have to have that understanding of the technology, but what sort of can separate you from the rest? And I think what's been very helpful for me in my own personal career is it really being able to understand the business aspect of it. And I don't mean to say you have to be an expert in the business. That's not really what I'm talking about. It's really just, again, understanding better what their problems are, really understanding what is the challenge that's facing us and how would I look at that from a different point of view.
Great.
Yeah, I would definitely say that.
And I think most people, if they looked into your background and your CV, would agree that you've had a pretty impressive career so far.
Thank you.
I'm sure you will continue to do so. What are the secrets to your success then? I know you've probably given some hints in that piece of advice, but what would you say your core, the core things that have enabled you to be so successful and be where you are today?
So I would say, first is follow your passion. So, really what gets you excited? What are the things that sort of get you up in the morning? And those are the things that really, even if you're being discouraged. So for example, if you're a woman and you love coding and you're into that, and even if you, let's say, come from a family or a situation in which that kind of role is discouraged for whatever reason, I would say go for it. Still try to, push through it. I think that I think, at least for me, following your passion is key. I think another thing that's important is don't be afraid to make mistakes. I think that most people, I think women sometimes also are afraid to make mistakes. We think, oh no, I've made this horrible mistake and I'm never going to sort of get over it, or I'm going to be fired, or whatever the situation is. But the reality is that the mistakes that you make, you will learn the most from them. I think, and when I think back on my career and where I've made the largest mistakes are where I've really had the greatest lessons and where I've really learned the most. And I think one other thing that my father used to say to me, and it just stuck for me for years and years, which is, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think as women, we are afraid to ask for what we want. I think it's something that, whether it's upbringing or, I don't know, culture, for whatever reason, I think a lot of women are afraid to do that. But, whenever I'm in a situation, I kind of am like, oh, well, should I ask for that? I sort of have my dad in the back of my head saying, well, if you don't ask, you don't get. Okay. And if it's appropriate, then I'll go ahead and ask for it, So that's, I would say, 3 things that I can sort of think of.
Great stuff. Thank you. And that actually brings me on to my last question. And this has flown by. And in the back of my head, I almost want to ask more questions about the stuntman career because I'm fascinated. But I'll stick with the core question. But and it's around, what more do you think that we could be doing as a society, to support greater female representation within tech?
I would say, I think some of the programs that we're doing in terms of the STEM and the STEAM programs are really foundational for, what we need to do. I think encouraging young people, especially young women, to be able to go into those areas, I think is absolutely critical. I think also just really being available for people who are interested in this arena, this area. And also, I think people also think that technology is one thing. To have a career in IT, it's one thing, but there is a breadth of things that you can do in IT. Just because you're a coder, or just because you're not a coder, doesn't mean you can't have a career in IT. I'm a perfect example of that. I'm not someone who does coding. That's not my sort of background, not something I necessarily find my passion out of. So that's not something that I do. So there's a lot of opportunities, and I would say being able to provide more exposure to all of the breadth of opportunities that exist in IT, I think, is important. And that's something I think that we can do more of as well.
Fantastic. Really good feedback. And that brings us to the end of the episode. So Faye, thank you so much for coming on and for giving up the time and speaking with you and sharing some really valuable advice. So it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great. And to the viewers, thanks again for watching. If you've enjoyed the session, please feel free to interact or share this with someone. And please do join us for the next leg of the series in a few weeks' time. But in the meantime, please take care and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.